as is evident in the number of verified views submitted with the application and viewed on our site visit this morning. If this development is approved, important heritage assets will be lost and an irreversible and harmful impact on the character of Spitalfields. It is for these reasons, Mr Mayor, that I respectfully request that in your determination you place substantial weight on the Council's resolution to refuse planning permission and conservation area consent.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted to finish by giving you an insight into why the committee made the decision that we did. The reports you've seen focus heavily on the office's recommendations in favour. What I wanted to do is focus on some of the concerns that we raised. For me, it's vitally important that there's political oversight for these types of decisions. There's a reason that elected members have the final say. That's because both councillors and you as mayor are ultimately accountable to the constituency on this one. We considered all of the evidence at length, the jobs, the scale, the housing and the nature of the development, but overall the decision was made for this reason, that there's a fine balance between the desire to develop and the desire to preserve the heritage. On this occasion, we felt the loss of history, the loss of heritage and the impact that it had on the feel of the area simply outweighed the benefits of the development. We do not believe that rejecting this means that no development could take place. We were simply asking that the developers look again and bring back proposals that are more complementary to these historic buildings. Many of the benefits we believe can be delivered with another proposal, whereas if we chose to demolish these buildings, we'd lost that history forever. It was a very difficult decision, as you say, but the committee, in my view, made the right decision based on the evidence, and we'd urge you to make the same.
Thank you both very much indeed. Thank you for keeping your presentation so much to time. Can we now hear from the objectors to this proposal? And the total number of minutes for the whole objection is 15, but each individual objector has a maximum of 5. So that, by my maths, that's three objections of 5 minutes each. Who wants to go first? Or you could have loads of objections of less than 5 minutes. I don't mind. Blast away. But it's up to you to decide how you want to do it. But perhaps you could begin and introduce yourself.
Okay. Maybe if all the objectors could come forward to the desk and then.
Okay, I'll start. Okay, my name's Dan Cruikshank. I've lived in Spitalfields for over 30 years, and since 1975 I've been a trustee of the Spitalfields Trust. That's battled to save and sympathetically repair historic houses in the area. And I'm speaking tonight for the Spitalfields Historic Buildings Trust. I've seen the transformation of Spitalfields from an area of desperate decay, deprivation and demolition into the vibrant place it is today. In its mix of uses and of its people, and in its sense of community, in the regeneration of its historic architecture, Spitalfields has become a model of urban renaissance studied and admired throughout the globe. Its character, both architecturally and socially, is very distinct and very robust. The Spitalfields Trust is not against change in Spitalfields. History of the area is characterised by vigorous change, both socially and architecturally. What, of course, is important, vitally important, is the nature of that change. In the Trust view, what's needed on the application side is a sustainable development that builds on the history of the site and of the area, that will continue the social and commercial renaissance of Spitalfields, acknowledge and enhance its established character, social character and architectural character, that will bring new jobs and offer a mix of housing. And it's important to remember about Spitalfields that the success of the area is based on the fact that it contains a rich mix of relatively small buildings containing a large variety of uses. And that is distinguished by people living and working in the area, by diverse communities coexisting in productive and mutually beneficial harmony. Any development on the Fruit and Wool Exchange site can only be acceptable if it recognises, reflects and continues these characteristics. The view of the Trust that instead of doing that, this scheme dilutes the quality of the area. So, in a sense, we feel that what's proposed is, rather than a rich mix of building uses, one is confronted by essentially an office megastructure hiding behind a superficially diverse variety of facades. So, that's a fundamental kind of objection. Also, the objection is to do with the uses. There is no on-site housing. I believe it's a fundamental policy of Tower Hamlets to have on-site housing, and so on. So the uses and the architecture seem unsatisfactory. Also, it obliterates Dorset Street. Now, Dorset Street has been described earlier on as a private service road, but it's become that. In actual fact, it was laid out in 1672, approved as it happens by Sir Christopher Wren, interesting moment in the development of Spitalfields, and is a street of great importance. It is, in a conservation area. Where else in an historic city, Rome or Venice, would a 17th century street be obliterated? I doubt very much if it would. Why, in the heart of Spitalfields conservation area, should a street that carries many memories and much relationship to the history of the area, why should it be just eradicated? Also, the Fruit and Water Exchange itself is a fine building. Keeping the elevation to brush the street is okay, a move in the right direction. It is simply rather an ironical retention, simply the facade and nothing else. History, of course, is much more than skin deep. The building contains a fine collection of interiors, an amphitheatre that was once the largest auction room in London, I believe, many fine details. The Gun Public House is a very important building. It serves the community, dates from the late 1920s, and when many London pubs are closing, it continues to thrive. Very important to the community. The design of the building is a long, complicated debate, I suppose. Architecture is very subjective, but it should reflect the strong architectural idiom of the area and obviously have a very sensitive response to the great masterpiece of Hawksmoor's Church across the road. In the view of the Spitalfields Trust, the scheme simply does not do this. Nor, I suppose one should say, does it seem to offer much in the way of bringing life to the area or creating local employment. I'm also just finally, must admit, I'm slightly baffled in a way by this evening's proceedings. The points I've made have already been made and agreed by Tower Hamlets Council. The scheme we're seeing tonight essentially has been deferred and rejected already unanimously by all members of Tower Hamlets Planning Committee. By following the time-honoured democratic procedures in local government, the case against the proposal has already been won by the objectors. Yet here we are again tonight, going through the same procedure. I fear that this is really about as an event organised to reverse the decision of Tower Hamlets and really not to be a full debate about the nature or appropriate qualities of the scheme. However, I wait with interest to see what the decision is. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure there'll be, if you don't, I will ask some questions after we've heard from both sides. I'm sure we'll try and let's hear from another objector.
My name is Paul Johnston. I'm an architect and I run a local architectural practice really quite close to the site. I've been practicing in the East London and Spitalfields area for the last 18 years. And during that time, we have secured hundreds of planning permissions within East London. They include listed building conservation area permissions and regular planning applications. Many of these in the Spitalfields area, many adjacent to two street blocks that make up the application site. The site itself comprises two Spitalfields street blocks bisected by an existing road. When the street blocks are combined and the road is included, the resulting area approaches the size of Wembley football pitch. That is approximately 80 by 110 metres. This is an enormous plot of land, and the owners and developers have seized upon this concept as a way of maximising the scale of their speculative development. Replacing these two separate lots with one big building eradicates a significant piece of historic urban grain, human scale, street vistas, and light and space between the two existing street blocks forever. It enables the developers to try and justify the demolition of the historic heritage assets of the Fruit and Wool Exchange, the Gun Public House, and the Barclays Bank building, and having eliminated these heritage assets, they regrettably have then been given the chance to create a situation where they can thereby eliminate the need for housing on the site. Moving on. Unfortunately, the proposed speculative development fails to match the quality of the existing historic buildings. Flimsy argument and poor policy interpretation has been provided to justify their demolition and demonstrate that the existing buildings are not capable of being upgraded to contain contemporary flexible office floor space. I'd like to talk a little bit about this so-called public route through the building. From White's Row, a ramp with a large adjacent restaurant leads to a hard-edged corporate courtyard, which is flanked by a coffee shop, a small cafe and a retail unit. Although access to the courtyard and beyond might be more obvious from Brushfield Street, it will not be enough to attract public use and viable retail activity. Our conclusion is that in no time this route will officially or unofficially be closed off to the public, not unlike the existing gated Dorset Street. Many people who live, work or visit Spitalfields know that if they enter the area via Artillery Passage, the obvious route to the Spitalfields market is via Crispin Street. Unfortunately, the Crispin Street facade in this speculative development is now largely a roller-shuttered service road, devoid of any human scale, activity or architectural quality. This is a significant missed opportunity by the developers to reactivate this fine street. I want to talk about the Brushfield Street facade.
Sorry, I didn't want to say, which street are you talking about?
Crispin Street.
Crispin Street.
I was discussing Crispin Street.
Thank you. Crispin Street. Which one's Crispin Street?
The Brushfield Street LFW, London Fruit and World Exchange facade, is left as nothing more than a cardboard cutout with the speculative office building squeezed in behind. The fact that the facade is not used within design shows a failure to accept the merits of this existing building. In fact, the speculative office facade is set back from the Brushfield Street facade, divorcing it from the real Fruit and Wool Exchange elevation. This is a poor and very predictable design cliché. The remainder of the largely impermeable elevations consist of standard office proportions, windows, rhythms and materials. And to conclude, I'd just like to say London needs to show the world that it can sympathetically repair, regenerate and rebuild its city and not allow a speculative development quango to bulldoze through our neighbourhoods and communities, steamrolling over local and national government legislation, trampling on publicly elected local councillors who voted down their application twice before today. The supporters of this scheme have argued that this is the best scheme that has been developed to date. The best so far is not a good enough reason to support such a scheme. There's one last point, and that is any number of alternative designs could support the Section 106 benefits that have been offered in this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself, sir? We met this morning, I think.
My name is Peter Boiseau. I'm a local resident. We live in Spitalfields and we don't want this development. Over 800 people have written or signed objections to this scheme, yet those in favour, a handful. And most of those with a financial incentive. Sadly, money talks. The promise of grants or more customers through doors cloud otherwise sane judgments, just as I'm sure the promise of Crossrail money heavily influences your judgment. Democratically, we've already won. Knowledgeable, locally elected people who know Spitalfields, who live and work in the area, have twice thrown this scheme out. And yet, here we are in the equivalent of a penalty shootout. Surely a sham of democracy. Two examples that directly affect us. A huge signature restaurant, cheek by jowl with White's Row residents, thrown out twice by councillors, and finally moved to a more sympathetic site by the developers. After tonight's hearing, we predict its return.